Hello, everyone. Welcome to Risk Roundup. The topic for today's Risk Roundup is Security Centric Risk Management Framework. The cyberspace has brought complex, chaotic, and challenging time for each nation, its government, industries, organizations, and academia, in short referred to as NGIOA. Cyberspace can be related to a neural network of a human brain that runs through all the components of a nation, enabling them to connect, communicate, collaborate, and function. Managing the security risk of this complex digital neural network is vital for each and every nation and all its components. As cyberspace is deeply embedded across each component of a nation, the crowded interconnections has caught nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia off guard. These interconnections and interdependencies raise an important question on whether our current risk management framework, tools, technologies, and processes are effective in managing the security risk of the cyberspace. To discuss this further, I'm delighted to welcome Kelley Dempsey from National Institute of Standards and Technology, in short referred to as NIST. NIST. Welcome to Risk Roundup, Kelley. We are delighted to have you on Risk Roundup.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. So, Kelley, the computer code, the connected computers, and the ecosystem that make the cyberspace brings complex challenges, as I discussed in the introduction, and complexities to everyone and everything from geospace to cyberspace to space. This tectonic shift on the nature of risk brought on by the cyberspace is creating complex challenges for every entity within and across every NGIOA. Due to cyberspace, the nature of risk have evolved in not only cyberspace but also in geospace as well as space. What would you tell to our global viewers and listeners as to the complexity of risk they are facing today due to cyberspace?
Yeah, so it is very complex, but I think we have to not get intimidated by the complexity. So regardless of how complex things are, I think it's important that we understand, assess, and respond to risk. And so we just need to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And so I think breaking things up into smaller chunks might make it easier. And that way people can move forward rather than letting themselves get overwhelmed by the complexity. So break things up, find ways to take it one bit at a time, and just move forward from there.
Yes, yes, I hear you, and it's a good point that you make there. Now, when the computer code and connected computers blur the line between geospace, cyberspace, and space, how can any entity within and across any NGIOA manage their risk effectively while bringing security and sustainability to their initiatives?
So there's no silver bullet or easy button. A lot of people are looking for various automated tools and things like that, but hard work and understanding what you're dealing with is the only thing that's going to help. So organizations have to get the right stakeholders and the right subject matter experts in the room and just do the best they can to determine what their risks are and what the appropriate responses are. And NIST does provide numerous guidance publications on risk management and risk assessment, as well as some implementation guidance for various technologies and security processes that are there to help people.
Yes, good information, Kelley. Thank you for that. Now, it is getting clear that for managing cyberspace and cybersecurity risk requires not only integration of cyberspace to geospace and space, but also requires a fine balance of cooperation and collaboration between, within, and across NGIOA, and from that people, processes, proficiency, and prudence. What are your thoughts and observations about this?
Well, I'm personally a big proponent of information sharing and collaboration, but many times we find that nations, industry sectors, et cetera, they're reluctant to share because they don't want to reveal their weaknesses. So I think, unfortunately, there's a real lack of trust out there. So that's something that needs to be overcome.
So, Kelley, when you talk about weaknesses, are these weaknesses about the risk management framework or processes, or what are we talking here?
Well, weaknesses that they find in their, so as far as sharing and collaborating, the industry or nations might be reluctant to share what they found as far as threats and vulnerabilities because they don't want other competitors or nations to find out where they might be weak. And so when they share information, that might be revealed.
I see. So it's competition. Because of the competition, they don't want to share the information.
Right, or because they even feel, competition or another nation or whatever, that there could be that could just bring additional threats to them.
Right. No, I understand that. Now, today's NGIOA largely operates in silo. I mean, we see that across industries, across sectors, across nations, that they operate as individual and independent entities. Silo NGIO operations of isolation age that are in existence today across nations in a digital global age have little or no understanding of how they are interconnected to each other, to how they are interdependent on each other, nor do they understand how they affect each other within and across nations. Now, the silo existence of NGIOA ignores its internal as well as external interconnectedness and interdependencies. This collective ignorance denies nations a fundamental ability to understand how each individual risk as well as decision of each individual entity impacts them all within and across nations. This is a critical risk facing nations today in a digital global age. What are your thoughts and observations on this?
Well, I think understanding and managing risk across all sectors of a nation that's going to be a pretty difficult task. And as I noted in the previous question, a lot of times organizations are reluctant to share that information, which makes it more difficult. So, but I think it'd be nice if nationally and internationally we could work to build trust and find ways to share threat information as well as information about connectedness and interdependencies. But it might be a bit naive to expect much progress in this area. And, it's also a leadership problem. And there is a reluctance, I think, by some in leadership to admit there's a problem because it seems so overwhelming. So they take the head in the sand approach and hope nothing happens, to their organization. And I think that's a big problem too.
Yes, that is a big problem, and I hope that we have decision makers and we have people in right places who understands the criticality of this, risk that we are facing in the cyberspace as well as geospace, and can work together, collaborate, and come up with some sensible frameworks and decisions that could help us manage the risk. But now, as we are talking, the developing a culture of risk awareness also is very critical and essential to the success of nations in a digital global age. Establishing integrated NGIO risk management framework is, I think, the way to build risk conscious culture in society, because we want to integrate each component of a nation, and we want to integrate all of their risk management processes and framework, so that we have a unified collective way of identifying, communicating, managing, and risk, whether irrespective of whether it's a cyberspace or geospace. Now, nations currently lack, I mean, we have so many different frameworks. We have information security framework, we have security framework, we have enterprise risk management framework, we have all kinds of risk management framework, but we lack an integrated and risk governance framework where all components of a nation work together at all levels, local, national, or global. And lack of this integrated risk governance framework denies nations much needed collective knowledge, structure, procedures, tools, clear roles and responsibilities, accountability that can effectively help them identify integrated NGIO risk, that means integrated nations risk, and help manage their integrated challenges. So how can organizations like NIST deal with such challenges and help their respective nations manage this?
Well, it's a really difficult challenge. NIST is a non-regulatory agency, so certainly within the United States, no one is obligated really, other than the federal government itself, to use our guidance. So, but we do provide all of our guidance free of charge and no copyright restrictions. So it's out there for people to use if they don't have the money to pay for other frameworks. Ours is free. And we do also promote interoperable automated assessment tools. And we provide outreach in the form of training and presentations on risk management processes. And, and when people, of course, come to us for advice, we offer it. We do actually get a lot of international delegations coming over and speaking to us about risk. So we're open to any type of collaboration or advice giving that anyone asks us for. But we're not out there marketing ourselves per se, being a federal agency. So, but if people come to us, we're always available and willing to help.
Yes, yes. Now I understand that and I appreciate the information. But see, this is the challenge, Kelley. I feel that, because nobody is obligated to use that framework, or they are not obligated to identify and report and communicate all these, risks, we do have a challenge because there is no incentive for many entities across sectors and industries that will, make them think that no, this is something I need to do, that is something I have to implement a proper risk management framework so that we can identify risk properly. So that is a challenge, and I hope that the decision makers across nations think about the nature of the challenge that we are facing, that by just saying that private public partnerships work together, that people will be willing to collaborate and cooperate and identify and work together to manage the risk facing their nation, is probably a wishful thinking. So, but anyway, that is something that is beyond our capabilities, but we do need to acknowledge that, to understand that. So, while many, and there is another important point that, Kelley, I would like to discuss with you, is that while many organizations are actively focusing on financial risk, legal compliance risk, and operational risk, the much focus on strategic security risk, which consists almost 70% of the overall risk portfolio, is non-existent. Understanding the strategic security risk, to me, because of the changing global fundamentals and rapid technological changes and rapid changes in service models, global competitions, and lack of effective governance, is a vital necessity for every nation. And I think we somehow lack that. What are NIST effort towards the education and awareness of strategic security risk?
Well, I wouldn't say the focus on security risk is non-existent, but there's definitely plenty of room for improvement. Myself and Dr. Ross do quite a bit of outreach on risk management, again, to just about any entity that requests it, U.S. federal organizations, state governments, academic institutions, industry, and occasionally even internationally. And we also do manage that outreach program, and we conduct information security workshops conducted at small businesses. And we also manage the NIST initiative, which is the National Initiative for Cyber Security Education. And that does promote information security education and awareness at all education levels. So they're starting even in primary school, reaching out to students and trying to educate them about the importance of security and awareness and things like that. So, and then they take it all the way up through the college level and into, the workforce.
That is certainly good to know, and that is a good initiative, definitely, to start that from elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Raise this awareness. That is very welcoming, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Kelley. Now we know that there is no such thing as secure anymore because of the complexities of challenges that we face. Security is rapidly becoming a complex challenge for each and every component of a nation, each and every NGIOA. Cyberspace is fundamentally changing the definition and meaning of security across nations, and incorporate that into geospace and space, and the complex security challenges hit the roof. How do we define security in a digital global age, Kelley?
Well, I think we have to go back to risk management. As we know, we can't ever reduce risk to zero. And so we have to continually try to understand what our risks are and try to manage our risks by making risk response decisions that are commensurate with the impact of loss and the likelihood of that loss occurring for whatever information we're trying to protect. And making decisions based on risk assessment helps us implement countermeasures that are, again, commensurate with that risk. So we get the protection we need without wasting resources by overprotecting. And I think that's really the key to good security.
Yes, no, definitely that is a key. But we also, I think there is also a need to understand that security, especially risk group, we define security as the state of industries and businesses, systems and infrastructure, innovation and technology, governance models and governments, products and services, intellectual property and trade secrets, people and processes, survival and sustainability, education and academia, research and development, regulations, compliance, robotics, artificial intelligence, communication, all these different things free from danger or threat of cyberspace. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that, what would you consider security? Is it only the security of the computers or security of the network? It is not just that. The security is much more than that, because you have to make sure that all your intellectual property, all your trade secrets, all your blueprints, everything is secure. So security is definition is changing. It is much more complex and much more broad and wide. And so we have to raise awareness. We have to create a dialogue about that. We have to raise awareness so that people understand that security is the definition of security is changing, and it is much more complex and much more broader than what we were thinking security before. But now let's go to another point, that the security concept, as I just described in the definition, that is currently being subjected to big changes in respect to its aim, capabilities, sources, connectivity, and the dimension of threats. In the new era of cyberspace, the security threat has no visible front, border, or armies. Amidst that, the challenge for each decision maker across nation is to determine what security risks they face in the cyberspace independently and collectively, and how much uncertainty they are exposed to and forced to accept as they strive to survive, sustain, grow, develop, and advance. The current uncertainty, broadened by the cyberspace and the digital global economy, presents both security risk as well as strategic opportunity to each component of a nation, with the potential to erode or enhance nation's value independently and collectively. How do we deal with such complex uncertainty?
Well, when we try to assess and manage information security risk, we are almost always dealing with qualitative information. So there's always going to be some degree of subjectivity and uncertainty, and it's usually not possible to resolve that uncertainty. So we have to try to build knowledge of uncertainty itself into the risk assessment process by documenting where in the process we didn't have the quantitative information, where we had to make assumptions, et cetera, so that we can at least remain aware of where within our risk management programs that we have that uncertainty. And those are going to be areas to keep a closer eye on with ongoing monitoring. And so, again, all we can really do is be aware of the uncertainty and where it exists, and keep a closer eye on that.
No, certainly. I mean, that is the beginning, that is the starting point. But it also seems to me that looking at all these different aspects, there is a need for security risk management framework, which can incorporate all these different, criteria and points that we are talking about, that will provide a new understanding of security, a new approach to security, key security risk principles and concepts, a common security risk language, a clear security direction and guidance. That is an ability to identify and integrate security risk in cyberspace, geospace, and space. What are your thoughts? Because I mean, like we talked before, that there are so many different kind of risk management frameworks, but there is not a framework that is specifically focusing on security risk management that incorporates cyberspace, geospace, and space, and all the components of a nation. We need a framework like that. What are your thoughts on that, Kelley?
Well, I actually have to say, and I really do believe that the holistic NIST risk management framework process does provide those things across all of those spaces, because it can be applied to any type of technology or system at any level. It has that flexibility. And so, especially when coupled with the new security engineering guidance in the form of Special Pub 800-160, that guidance is very focused on looking at risk and integrating protections into systems. And again, systems at any level that are for any type of environment, looking and getting those protections baked in as they're developed from the earliest point in the system development lifecycle. So, I mean, I think, again, there are frameworks out there, including this risk management framework, that can be applied, that are flexible enough to be applied in all of those different areas.
No, there are certainly many different frameworks like that, Kelley, but the challenge is that there are too many of them. Each nation has their own framework.
Right.
The public, not only the government, but also the private corporations have their own frameworks. So, I mean, how do you collectively, identify information from that? How do you collectively communicate that, these are the different risks we are coming across, and, that could be impacting you? That those things are not there. For NIST framework is there. I have, gone through the information, but it's a very good start, Kelley, no doubt about that. But there are key challenges here that how do you, it clearly guides that public and private needs to work together, but by just saying that, they are not going to work together. We need to provide some kind of structure, some kind of, mandatory guidelines, that these, not only guidelines, mandatory structure that would require each and every entity within a, nation to follow that. There needs to be some kind of incentives. There needs to be some kind of structure and communication structure, that if any entity finds certain kind of risk, then if that is something that is not manageable by them, if it's going to, impact other sectors within their industry, or if it's going to impact the nation, then it is mandatory that they, report that they take it up to the channel, so that communication channel, so that there is a room for effectively managing those risks. So that kind of structure I don't see in that, and those are the serious gaps. I mean, I agree to your point that NIST framework is there, but there are some clear, risk facing that framework because of the way the structure is. If we manage those risks, how to implement effective risk management framework that incorporates the security of the cyberspace, geospace, and space collectively across each of the component of a nation, then we could make it effective. So there is still, I think, a lot of work that needs to be done as far as the NIST framework goes. But again, this is the start, and I'm sure that everyone is acknowledging the need for further advances and further development in that. So hopefully we'll see some positive developments in the coming months and years. But let's go to we have already talked about how to define how the nature of the security, how the definition of security is changing. So according to you, Kelley, how would you define security, or how would NIST define security in a digital global age?
Well, without sounding like a broken record, I think security in any age, it has to be about risk management. And so whatever the definition of security is, actually securing our information, it has to be about risk management. But where we really need work is in the threat space, and trying to understand or know, or at least somewhat accurately predict where threats are coming from, what the motivations are of the threat itself or the attackers, and how well resourced the potential attackers are. And then we have to try to respond to that risk accordingly by either accepting it, but continuing to monitor it, or by introducing new or strengthened countermeasures. And that's how we can provide the best security we can across the board.
Yes, I hear you on that, Kelley. So the underlying premise of a need for security-centric, irrespective of whether it's cybersecurity risk management framework or a security-centric, integrated cyberspace, geospace, space risk management framework, is that in the interconnected and interdependent digital global age, no entity within any nation can effectively manage their security risk independently. Even if an entity manages its private security risk independently, the interconnected and interdependent risk facing them will undermine the isolated and independent risk management effort and program, and make the entity vulnerable to catastrophic events. Do you agree to such premise?
I do think that's true to some extent. NIST has tried to encourage, again, we're not a regulatory agency, so all we can do is encourage and try. But anyway, we have tried to encourage more robust communications efforts between entities. But again, there's that reluctance to share information and lack of trust. But in the US, we do have sector-specific information sharing groups called information sharing and analysis centers. And so that organizations of any kind within a given sector can share information with others in the same sector, who might have similar threats, similar operating environments, things along those lines. So there are these ISAC groups for things that this isn't an exhaustive list, but groups like real estate organizations, there's a state ISAC, there's health organizations ISAC, communications organizations ISACs, financial services ISAC. So, and many more. And so they're out there for again, groups in those areas that again would probably have similar threats, similar operating environments, so that they can at least maybe be sharing information about their threats and their risk and what they're doing about it with each other. And also from the U.S. perspective, we do have the U.S. CERT, which is the Computer Emergency Readiness Team. And that does, the CERT people look at risk across the board. They don't provide security necessarily, but they're working to make entities aware of threats and what can be done about it. So being aware, of course, is half the battle. If you know what's coming at you, you can be prepared. And by the way, the main page of the U.S. CERT website states that they do exchange critical cybersecurity information with trusted partners around the world. So, I don't know to what extent that is happening, but that is what they state on their webpage. So it's probably a good idea for people. And they have a lot of resources also for people. US CERT is run by Department of Homeland Security. So people can go and take a look at that and take a look at the ISAC groups. But but these are just ways we can try to better share information and try to all get better at that.
Sure. No, thank you for sharing that information, Kelley. I'm sure our global viewers and listeners will appreciate all the different, information that you provided. And I'm sure they will check out and see how they can effectively use that information for their benefit. So coming to the next point, there is a growing concern that there are many nations. Apart from this frameworks that we talked about, there is a growing concern that there are many nations that seem to be too weak or too fail to be able to provide their own components within their nation the necessary security in the cyberspace. Moreover, most nations with their current governance model are far from being ideal providers of cybersecurity. Now, technology and threats are forever intricately linked now, just like people and processes. So how do we manage our interconnected security risk, when there are so many nation states that are almost like failed states and very weak as far as, security guidelines or security infrastructure or security, processes and framework goes? So how
right. Well, we can only control what we can control. And so just like with any other type of security risk or any type of risk at all, we need to try to determine what our risk factors are, and those risk factors are the threats, vulnerabilities, likelihoods, and impacts that lead us to a qualitative determination of risk. And of course, when we're talking about other countries or even other people in industry or whatever that aren't doing as good a job as they could on their end, then that's a risk factor. That's a threat we have to consider. That interconnectedness itself is a threat to us. And so that's something we have to consider when we do our risk assessment. And then we try to determine the appropriate risk response. What can we do to mitigate the risk of that interconnectedness with these other people or entities that aren't managing security as well as they could or should? And what can we do about that? Or again, do we just have to accept that risk in order to operate in today's world? And again, and just keep an eye on it and try to work with the other nations or what can you do, right?
Right.
Again, you can only control what you can control.
Right. Now I hear you, Kelley. Now we have talked about this, that there are many different risk management frameworks and there are many different across nations. And even within a nation, there are many different risk management frameworks. But for the benefit of our global viewers and listeners, can you highlight some of the risk management frameworks that are used today to manage cybersecurity risk?
Mm-hmm. I think, I can't speak for very many nations or what they're using specifically, but I do know that I know for sure that many or several at least are using the NIST risk management framework, and many more are using the ISO 27000 series for risk management. And I think those are the two, most used ones that are not homegrown. And then some may also be using the COBIT IT governance framework, and that touches on information security and risk, but is really more focused on supporting business goals. And some may also be using the new NIST cybersecurity framework. But the cybersecurity framework, which is very good and useful, but it's a meta framework, and it's really dependent on most more focused frameworks like the ISO or the COVID or the NIST RMF. So,
Yes.
but those are the primary ones I think that nations are using that aren't homegrown.
Right, right. No, I hear you on that. Now, I mean, we have talked about the challenges of having too many different frameworks, as well as the challenges of having too many different approaches and too many different processes that are independently and individually, managed to with the hope to get achieve security. But to me, as we talked before, that to me it seems that there is a requirement for a framework that expands on all available frameworks and provides an effective, unified, one single, security-centric risk management framework that provides each and every nation and all its components a forward-looking way to identify and manage independent as well as interdependent risk. At the same time, it brings integrity, neutrality, and a collective approach to managing security risk, and is non-partisan, because risk management is not about any political ideology or partisanship. So it should be non-partisan, neutral, and objective, focus on managing global, national, and local risk. And in addition, it should also reverse the focus from transferring risk to preventing risk or mitigating risk or managing risk. There are some risks we'll be able to prevent, but most of the risk will be able, we just have to manage it effectively where we can. So we have to, there is right now a culture and a focus on transferring risk. Most of the people, they think that, if there is a insurance policy available, let's just, buy that and, get away with the what we have to do to be accountable for managing our risk. So we have to reverse that focus from transferring risk to preventing, mitigating, or managing risk, and embed strategic risk. Again, this is a very important point, that we have to embed strategic risk as a vital part of the risk management framework, because that is the one that has the most impact. When you actually look at the impact that we can get from either financial risk or operational risk or legal risk or strategic risk. So that is very important, that we embed that and change the approach to an enterprise and makes it more inclusive to today's global reality, because enterprises are not located within the geographical boundaries of a nation anymore. So we have to redefine the definition of redefine the enterprise, because of the way they operate across nations and their geographical boundaries. And we have to connect cyberspace risk to geospace risk and space risk, because the computer code and internet has and connected computers has connected everything, cyberspace, geospace, and space. And we have to integrate government risk with industries risk, organizations risk, and academia's risk to give a comprehensive overview of a nation's risk. And we have to integrate nation's risk to give a comprehensive view of global risk. So we have to provide and promote proactive approach to managing risk. So there are so many different points that we have to ensure that we incorporate all these different factors in the security risk management framework that we have, and we develop and we promote, so that everyone across nation can adopt that framework, and they can implement that and effectively manage the security risk within their nations. What are your thoughts on that, Kelley?
Well, I think that that is a really good list of criteria to shoot for, but I think it would be difficult to get an accurate picture of risk across all of those sectors, across government, industry, academia. These are organizations that all have different missions. They process fill different purposes, and likewise they're going to face different threats. So risk tolerance across those organizations would be as different as the risk responses. And all that said, NIST does have the published guidance on risk management at 3 tiers across an organization: the governance tier, the mission business process tier, and of course the information system tier, where the focus is strategic, integrated security risk management at the governance tier, and then moving more towards tactical security risk management as you move down the tiers. And so, I mean, looking again at some of the NIST guidance and trying to adapt it for these larger purposes, you know, is probably going to be a good start. But, you know, getting just, you know, getting agreement across all these organizations, it's almost, unfortunately, it's almost insurmountable, like you said, unless there's some overarching legal requirement that is going to come down from the lawmakers.
Yes, that is correct. I mean, it is difficult, Kelley, no doubt about that, but it's not impossible. And if we look at the critical nature of risk that we are facing, that each component of any nation, irrespective, I mean, we are in United States, so we can talk about that, but every nation, if they look at the nature of risk that is coming to them, if they see the, you know, in what kind of critical impact that it would bring, then I'm sure that they would think about the necessity of this kind of framework. It is difficult and it's not impossible, but we have to, it's one step at a time, Kelley. So right now, we just have to, you know, talk about it and create awareness about all these complex challenges. So let's move forward on that. With the war moving to cyberspace, Kelley, it is necessary to recognize that while the best defense is a good offense, constructing proactive security risk defenses that includes tools, technologies, and processes rather than passive ones becomes a necessity for survival as well as sustainability in not only cyberspace but also geospace and space. What are your thoughts on that, Kelley?
Well, I agree that organizations should focus on first conducting a solid risk assessment and then continue to monitor their risk over time, and then use that information to determine the appropriate countermeasures needed to provide defense in depth. And that defense in depth is going to include management level controls like security policies, operational level controls like security processes and plans such as log management plans, contingency plans, a patch management process, and so on. And then also technical level controls like specific configuration settings, intrusion detection prevention tools, things along those lines. So I think that's all you can really do.
Yes, no, I hear you on that. Now, the fierce mapping of cyberspace has already begun, and security breaches have become an actuality of life. Amidst that, the important question is for each and every nation and each and every decision maker across nations, its government, industries, organizations, academia, is that how do we secure cyberspace? What are cybersecurity risks? What is the actual cost of cybersecurity breach to a nation and its entities? Because I have been talking to economists and I have been talking to many decision makers across nations, and from what I hear is that, you know, there are serious challenges even in actually becoming aware or identify that they have been hit, you know, that there has been a cybersecurity breach. So there are many challenges. What are your thoughts on that, Kelley?
Well, you know, again, there's no easy button. We have to work really hard to try to understand what the risks are and employ those appropriate countermeasures that are commensurate with that risk. So I can't provide an accurate overarching response to that question, but regarding what are cybersecurity risks, risk, again, is always a function of the 4 risk factors: threats, vulnerabilities, impacts, and likelihoods. And the threat sources and events faced by the organizations are determined first, then whether or not the organization is vulnerable, and finally, what is the impact if a vulnerability to a threat was exploited, and how likely is it that that's going to happen. And the risk is then a subjective rating on some qualitative scale, like high, moderate, or low, or 1 to 10, something like that. And risk is going to vary across organizations based on those factors. So, for example, some organizations are going to be more vulnerable to certain threats if they don't have strong security processes in place, such as a strong patch management and configuration management process. They're going to be more vulnerable than an organization that does have good processes like that. And also, different organizations do face different threats and have different levels of risk tolerance. And as far as the costs, I mean, that, you know, that can really run the gamut, and it's hard to answer that in any meaningful way. And I certainly don't have that type of data, and I'm not sure who even does. But you know, it's really gonna. I mean, look at the OPM breach that the U.S. government just had. How much is that costing? A lot, you know, and cost as yet to be undetermined, because we still don't know what all the fallout is from that. But I'm quite sure millions have already been spent on notifications, just little things like that, just notifications and paying for the protection that all the federal employees, that were part of the breach, all of that just alone, let alone all the time that's been spent on trying to fix the problem. And again, we don't know, those costs are going to be ongoing because we don't know what's going to happen. And so that's just one example of one breach. So trying to pin down the costs, it could be, it's always going to be significant, I think.
Yes. No, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of unknowns right now, and we still don't have enough information or data or enough, ways or methods or means to be able to calculate effectively, what is going to be the cost of all that. So, I mean, there is also another, point that we need to discuss is that how should entities across nations evaluate and calculate their cybersecurity risk? Because there are a lot of different approaches, a lot of different, ways that people and organizations are, trying to calculate what their cybersecurity risks are. I mean, I would say that, you first identify your assets, you understand your threats, understand your security vulnerability, and that would, give you an idea of what kind of risk you are facing. But what would you say about this?
Well, I agree. I mean, and like we've kind of already been talking about, employing some consistent and repeatable risk management process that does include framing risk, determining an appropriate risk management strategy for the organization, and then assessing risk and determining how to appropriately respond to risk and monitoring risk over time. I mean, those are the components of a good risk management process. And that is certainly easier said than done. But again, we do provide that guidance on risk management, risk assessment, and risk monitoring. That is, so all the factors are, at least organizations can use our free guidance to get themselves started. And again, it's flexible enough and it can be tailored to organizational needs.
Right. And I'm glad that you are emphasizing that it is free for everyone to use that information. So, I mean, when that knowledge is available, when the information and processes and tools are available, I hope that, many people, many organizations across nations are, willing to use that to their benefit and advantage. So I'm glad you shared that information. Now, identifying and understanding cybersecurity risk is one thing, and managing it effectively is whole another thing. Cyberspace has brought each and every entity a liability due to the security risk brought to assets in CGS that may or may not belong to them. Amidst that, the big question today is how can any entity within any component of a nation, that is NGIOA, across nations ensure cybersecurity liability individually and collectively, because each and every entity faces independent risk that they can manage on their own and interdependent risk that they cannot manage on their own. For example, inter-organizational information systems essentially physically connects firms' IT infrastructure via the internet and exposes the participating firm to network-wide security risk. An organization's network is at risk if a hacker gains access to its partner's network. Even firms without close business relationships may be logically interdependent. Strategic hackers often evaluate the security level of firms and select their target on the basis of whose systems they can break easily. So these are the interdependent risks we are talking about. So how can entities across nations manage both their independent and interdependent risks? That is what a critical challenge I find with the NIST framework or any other framework that I am evaluating at this point, that there is no clear way of managing interdependent risk at this point.
Well, that's it's like we've talked about. You can't control what you can't control. So you can either you have to go back to the need to just understand what your risks are. So that interdependency, that interconnectedness, that is a risk. That creates a risk. And if you can't control or have some sort of security agreement with the other end or who you're connected with, then you have to understand that is a risk in and of itself. And then with at least having that understanding, organizations can at least monitor those risks and the risk factors associated with that, even if they can't control the root cause of that risk. And perhaps they can put some countermeasures in place on their end to protect their own organizational information and mitigate those risks on their side. And of course, that's again understanding what the risks are of the because then what are your choices? Either you disconnect, or you learn to live with the risk, or you put some mitigation measures in place. And I mean, if you're interconnected with an entity that you're doing business with, then you might be able to do something like an interconnection security agreement and get some assurance that the other end has done similar measures as you have. But when you're just talking about the wide world of web, and the internet itself, then you just have to be aware of what the problems are and try your best to mitigate those risks. I mean, again, I'll say again, there's no easy button here. It's hard work.
Sure. No, I hear you on that. I mean, there is no easy way, but I'm sure, I mean, this is a good start. I mean, understanding and acknowledging that these are the risks, and, we have to either accept those risks, or we have to try to mitigate them. Those are the different possibilities that we have. I mean, prevention, mitigation, or management. But there is a time also that will come that we have to start talking about, insuring certain kind of risk, or, we will have to come up with some different models or some different new innovative approaches by which those interdependent risks can be effectively managed. We'll have to think about risk pooling. We have to think about a lot of different, measures that would be, effective in this kind of situations. But again, that is a topic of discussion for another time. So let's move forward on probably, another that entity about the insurance. Again, this is not the NIST goal, the insurance, cyber insurance, and you are not in the business of cyber insurance. So I'm not sure how much weightage you can give on your thoughts and inputs on about cyber insurance. But let's talk about it briefly, and then that when entities evaluate purchasing insurance to specifically protect against losses from risk from cybercrime, what is important to understand is whether cyber risks, cyber crimes can be managed with cyber insurance. I mean, this is one way of that people are talking about, that we can manage, cybersecurity risk by, having cyber insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Does NIST consider cyber insurance as a key tool to managing cybersecurity risk, irrespective of their dependencies?
So, well, NIST does not take a position on cyber insurance. So, NIST is under the Department of Commerce, and the mission of the Department of Commerce is to promote innovation and competitiveness within U.S. companies. So, NIST, doesn't take a position on commercial products. So, but I do have personal thoughts on the topic that are mine and mine alone, and do not represent those of NIST. Okay. And I think that cyber insurance does not reduce security risk, only the resultant financial risk. So it doesn't change your security risk at all. It might reduce your financial risk. And the cyber event or incident that, has still occurred, information has still been stolen, and an insurance payout doesn't change that. And what if the company's proprietary design documents are stolen? Will the payout from the insurance cover ongoing losses caused by a competitor having that information? Or if customer information is stolen, will the insurance payout repair the trust and loss of confidence of customers? And for government organizations, insurance isn't an option anyway. So I think there may be a tendency to think, if I have insurance, I don't need to worry about putting countermeasures in place. And that might especially be a factor in small businesses. And this is, of course, completely incorrect. And in fact, many cyber insurance policies won't pay out anything if the organization has not done any security due diligence. So I think there's a danger of a false sense of security with cyber insurance.
Yes, I hear your point about false sense of security, and we'll just have to wait and see whether insurance industry will play a role to drive effective security risk management change in the cyberspace. Because I personally feel that insurance community, insurance industry can play a very big role as far as the cybersecurity risk, goes, because, they could enforce, they could mandate any organization that wants to buy, say, cybersecurity policy from them that, okay, you need to implement effective risk management processes, you need to implement effective risk management tools and framework. If you do that, then you will be and if you manage the independent risk that your organization can effectively manage on their own, if you do that, then you are entitled to purchase a cybersecurity policy for the interdependent risk that your organization faces. So I feel that cyber insurance industry can play a very big role as far as cybersecurity risk management framework go or security centric risk management framework goes. But again, that is something we'll have to see in the coming months and years, how the insurance industry frames their response about the cybersecurity risk, and we'll have plenty to discuss at that point. But I would give you your last word, your final thoughts about all this.
On cyber insurance.
Yes.
Well, I think what you said is correct. It could be possible for the insurance industry to drive effective security risk management by putting out some requirements for some minimums. But I think also there could be problems there, like who's going to assess whether or not the controls or the process that the companies have in place is sufficient. My concern would be that wouldn't be evenly applied across the board, and it also allows, and again, nothing against insurance companies or anything, but it could allow them an out for them to deny claims, and so those are my two primary concerns. What entity would assess whether or not the insurance required controls and processes are actually effective, and again, the insurance companies just sort of finding some excuse from their assessment to not pay a claim. So I don't know. I don't have any other ideas right off the top of my head, but I'm not sure that having insurance drive effective security risk management is the best way. I mean, it might be a way. It might help. It could help.
It could help, but then, like you said, we still have to discuss, many different points, many different criteria. Which organization will be able to manage all that?
Right.
Will be responsible. So there are many different points we have to discuss. But that is a thought that this industry is there, and they are in the business of insuring risk. But their current, approach is just to transfer risk and worry about the financial payout of that, but they could play a much bigger role. How
Right.
insurance industry, before several hundred years when it started, how the insurance industry was accountable in setting standards, that role they can take back. They can set standards. They could be effective drivers to bring a lot of positive change. So again, that is a topic I would be discussing with some insurance industry executives in the coming weeks. So we'll just have to wait and see what their response is about that. But so across nations, organizations like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, are working towards establishing frameworks and processes to effectively manage the security risk of the digital global age. The challenge is that this work is done in silo most of the times. While some nations have adopted NIST guidelines and framework, the interdependencies necessitates collaboration and cooperation to develop a security-centric risk management framework that is accepted at all levels across nations. Risk Group, Cybersecurity Risk Research Center, and Strategic Security Risk Research Center are created for this very purpose, is to identify, evaluate, and manage the risk facing NGIOA in CGS, that is nations, its government, industries, organizations, and academia in cyberspace, geospace, and space. Discuss, debate, and define necessary framework, structure, processes, tools, and technologies to manage the security risk of not only the digital global age, but also of the coming technological superconvergence. And integrate and coordinate risk management and governance framework at all levels within and across nations for managing security risk facing NGIOA in CGS amidst the rapidly emerging technological superconvergence. So I hope that, with the dialogues like this, we can effectively manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on Risk Roundups, or to watch the Risk Roundup videos, or to hear the Risk Roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com, and we are also available on iTunes and Android platform, and across all the professional networks. So make sure that you watch this wonderful dialogue that we just had with Kelley Dempsey from National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I hope that you benefit from that. Kelley, thank you so much for agreeing to come on Risk Roundup and sharing your thoughts and sharing information about what NIST is doing in their effort towards, in their goal towards making this world secure and making this world a bit safer for conducting our business in cyberspace. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Kelley. I appreciate your time. And until next, that's it today, friends. This is the end of our session today. Until next time, I'm Jayshree Pandya, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.